doing the whole book of Kings as we're debating right now. Some people are happy, some people are sad. We should have done, I looked at doing Samuel all as one, but it was too much. I mean, it was such a big story. I mean, you could say this covers even more years of history, but I don't know. I'm kind of following what Through the Bible did this too. They divided 1st and 2nd Samuel. What did I say? Through the Bible?
Did you mean
Bible Project. And then they have 1st and 2nd Kings together here, so I thought it fit. I agree. But anyway, 1st and 2nd Kings, 2 books in our Bible, one written as one scroll, just like 1st and 2nd Samuel, just like 1st and 2nd Chronicles. One big scroll divided because of scroll length for convenience. They do have natural breaks, like 1st and 2nd Samuel. What was the natural break between the two? Kind of Saul, his kingship, and then David, his kingship. The natural break here in 1st and 2nd Kings is actually like Elijah and Elisha. But first, the book of Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings, is a big book about all the kings that came after David. And these kings are lesser known. One of them is quite prominent, the very first king that we're going to see. But it goes through a whole bunch of kings, and then it pauses to focus in on 2 different prophets, Elijah and Elisha, to kind of do a deeper dive. It's kind of like a 30,000-foot view. You know, like, or maybe it's a bus tour view. Like, you know, when you're in a tour bus and like pointing out things, it's kind of like a tour bus book where they're like, oh, in 1945, this happened right there. See it out the window. And sometimes you get out of the bus, right? And you take a deeper look. So when we pause at Elijah and Elisha, that's a get out of the book, and when you see more details, get out of the bus. You stay in the book, but anyway, we go through a lot of years of history here. Once again, we don't know the author. Someone brought up, maybe it was Ezra, I think, for Samuel. I think it was you, Betsy. Ezra, I did look it up. Ezra wrote, it's pretty confirmed, wrote 1st and 2nd Chronicles, so that's what's ascribed to him. It's unlikely that Ezra wrote these. We think maybe Jeremiah is a possibility, or like a group of prophets, but we don't really know. It doesn't say who wrote it, but it was written in the time after the exile. So basically, we get to see in this book from kind of the highest point of Israel to the very lowest point. We're going to cover, like, you know, the reign of King David would be total absolute pinnacle. And then Solomon's reign, which is where we start in this book, is like even better. Like, as far as a man of character, like, David's the best king, but Solomon, his son, brings it to Israel to like the best place. They have they're safer than they have ever been. David does most of that. Defeating their enemies around them. It's a time of, David brings in a time of peace, and then there's a massive time of prosperity for the kingdom of Israel. This is when they build the temple. We're getting into our details, but really Israel has like the best. We see Israel go from the best to the absolute worst, which it ends in them being conquered and taken away as slaves. So big swing in this book. Genre is historical narrative. I mean, we're telling the story of the history through individuals and their experiences in kind of a narrative story way. The audience is to the divided Israel, like kind of to show, look where we were, look how great it was, and now look where we are, right? So the people know how this all happened because they weren't necessarily alive to see it, but it's kind of like reflecting back, like, we had it so good, and now look at us. So the audience is the divided Israel. So spoiler alert, the country divides, kind of a civil war thing. And after Solomon. When and where? So we cover, again, a long amount of years. Anyone do you want to do the math on that? 970 BC to 586.
256 or 356?
586. What?
All of the 800.
Oh, how many years?
350.
My Bible says
4
that
years?
it ends in 850 BC with the death of King Ahab.
Well, that's First Kings.
Yeah, we're.
So we're
Oh.
First and
I
Second
was like,
Kings. So I'm
hold
covering. Yes. First
300
Kings would end then, but Second Kings goes on for almost 400 years. I was thinking, yeah, 350 years, roughly. Math 16. Math is tough. Math is tough.
384.
80.
What?
Yeah, 84.
384 years, almost 400 years.
It's my favorite
Oh,
place,
yeah.
Babylon.
So this happens. The location of these books is Israel, but then we have the divided kingdom. So we have a new place. It used to be kind of all Israel, but now there's Israel and Judah. So Israel and Judah are the two main places. We end up with two kingdoms here. And then the book ends in Assyria and Babylon. The northern kingdom of Israel gets taken to Assyria, and the southern kingdom of Judah gets taken to Babylon. So those are our places. You can't list every king. There are 40 kings, I think, in this book.
Yes.
Between the north and south kingdoms.
What's in the Bible?
We tried to get this, it's a VeggieTales What's in the Bible thing. It goes through every king. It's the creator of VeggieTales, sorry. Goes through every king and says good, bad, good, bad, good, bad. It's really funny, but we couldn't find it. We tried to get the library, it's not on the internet. It was very frustrating.
Yeah,
I'm
like
sorry.
I had it unfolded, it was there.
We even checked it out. Anyway, 40 kings, 20 in the north, 20 in the south. Some good, some bad, mostly bad. But here's our main characters still. David hasn't died yet. David dies at the very beginning and then gives power to his son Solomon. Who is Solomon's mom?
Bathsheba.
Bathsheba.
Yeah.
So it's very actually beautiful that, because we talked about Absalom and another son. There's a few different sons that could have become king that were probably first in line to be king. Absalom wasn't first in line of David's son, but he tried to take the kingdom and ended up dying doing that. And then brothers killed other brothers. Big mess to be in a royal family, still is today, but definitely was really bad in all the different kingdoms of royalty, because you'd be fighting over power, right? So ended up, the kingdom goes to Solomon, who is Bathsheba's son. Not their first son, remember that child died. But Bathsheba and David's son Solomon, which is a beautiful story of redemption, right? Definitely the worst moment of David's life is the worst sins he ever committed, that whole thing. And then for God to redeem that, this is what God does. He takes our junk and turns it into good things. Came out that Solomon is a king. Solomon's son Rehoboam is next, and then Jeroboam. Rehoboam is where the kingdom splits under him. And then, we kind of have our deeper dive. So Elijah is a prophet that we have a deeper dive in, so he's the main character. His main adversaries are Ahab and Jezebel, the worst duo of king and queen ever there in the northern kingdom. And then Elisha is the prophet that follows Elijah, right? It's in alphabetical order. J comes before S, if you ever forget. Elijah comes before Elisha. That's how I remember it for some reason. All right, so those are our main characters. Now, getting into our main events. We start with Kings opens David in his old age. David is an old man now. He's an old man. He has lived.
Now, King David was old and advanced in age.
And his later years, remember, we looked at weren't good. They weren't great. He didn't have a super.
I found the 1 minute clip on YouTube.
Yeah, it's not the whole thing.
Oh, darn. Okay, I was like, I could
Yeah,
see
there's
it.
a 1 minute clip. I looked at all the YouTube videos. I spent forever doing this, and the whole thing's not up. It's a little piece of it. It's not worth seeing.
Oh,
He was like, he couldn't get warm, and he was like,
Oh man, it gets a
Always
little weird
cold.
here. Okay, PG-13 for sure here. He gets a young woman to keep him warm.
But he was
and
not
they
hitting
But
cuddle.
it says they don't have sexual relations.
Yes, that's why it's PG-13 and not R, Jessica. Anyway,
What, did I say a naughty word? Like, if I just use the same word the Bible uses.
right, but that's why I said it's rated PG-13. It's just weird, okay?
Snuggles
Like
all night long.
it says it's not wrong. It's just to keep him warm. It's very strange. Anyway, best
I
thing.
know he
keep
had
him
a
warm.
wife.
You know what? That's why they invented
She was
electric
okay.
blankets.
She was old and cold too. Okay, maybe. I don't know.
Electric blankets, man.
They didn't have electric blankets.
That's my point. They just had young birds.
Old and cold. Oh. So David, in the end, you know, because of his sin, God said, your kingdom, your family's going to have all these problems, and it does, right? And so he gets, you know, he has to run. He's on the run again. Remember, he's running from his son
Old and cold.
Absalom, and then he's back on his throne. But things really aren't the same. But he tries to finish strong. Another one of his sons tries to claim the throne, Adjaniah, and so he starts kind of a little war. But see,
Who are we
David,
talking about? I'm sorry.
Adjaniah,
No,
David's
what
son.
king are you talking about?
David.
We're still talking about David. Okay. So I shouldn't be doing anything about Solomon yet.
That's fine. You know, there's a little skirmish here, but David got passive at the end. Like he doesn't discipline his son who rapes his sister in the other book. Now he doesn't discipline this other son, and doesn't discipline for them for trying to take the throne and stuff. He gets kind of passive in his old age. Nathan the prophet arrives and tells him. Does he tell him to make Solomon king? So David makes Solomon king. He gives the king to Solomon with Nathan, and gives Solomon final instructions on what he should do, and kind of gives a good speech about what this should be about. But then he tells him, like, if you murder these people, it'll make your king transition a lot easier. So it's also not great advice. So he has him kill a few, like, I think it's Joab and some other military guys, because it's this transition of power is disruptive, right? Like a peaceful transition of power is actually really difficult. I'm thinking about current events now. But you know, like there's an opportunity for people to jump in and be like, I should be king now. No, I should be king. And then you have a war. So to try to make this peaceful transition of power. But anyway, Solomon establishes his rule. He comes into power. That happens, I mean, fairly peaceably. There's some murder and stuff. But this is God's will for Solomon to become king. And then Solomon does the best thing of his life, the best example that he has,
Wisdom.
not building the temple.
Yeah.
God says, he gives him the opportunity, like, what do you want, Solomon? What do you want that will help you be king? And Solomon could have asked for a lot of things. He could have asked for power. He could have asked for money. He could have asked for, I don't know, a long life. You know, he could have asked for super strength. I don't know. Like Solomon, or like Samson or something. What does he ask God for? Wisdom. And which is a huge help to him as a king. We talked about this in youth group. Yeah, we talked about wisdom. And God is very pleased with his request, because he could have asked for the more fun things, I guess, right? But he asked for wisdom, and that's very effective in helping him as king. He becomes well known for his wisdom, being able to make the right decisions in challenging situations. What were you going to say?
It was more funny.
There's one really good example of Solomon's wisdom.
Yes, this is what I was going to
You
bring
guys know the story? Anyone know the story?
Oh, my favorite story! Yes.
Ellie, what's the story?
So there's these two
Women.
both had a baby.
Both had a baby.
And one time, they were just like sleeping, and one of the moms rolled over on their baby and killed it. And then the lady was like, "Oh, well, I still want a baby," so she took the other lady's baby when she was sleeping.
Switch them around.
And swapped
Switched
out a dead
them
baby.
out.
Switched them out, so she had the live baby, and her friend had a dead baby. And but the mom, she thought that this was like.
She's like, this is not my baby.
It's not my baby. It's not my baby. It can't be dead. So then to Solomon,
It
he's
doesn't
like,
look like my
My
baby.
but they're
baby has
fighting over the
brown
baby.
hair.
They're fighting over it. So they go to Solomon, and he's like, "Well, I could cut the live baby in half. And you guys could you could each have a half because you're fighting over it." And Solomon, and then
It seems like a
it's
terrible
like a
idea.
terrible thing. But the mom the not actual mom of the baby that's alive was like, "Yeah, that's fine, sure." But the mom the actual mom was like, No, don't do that.
Give the
No,
baby
just
to
give it
her.
to her. Just give it to the other woman.
Yeah.
She'd rather her baby be alive.
Yeah,
So
and
in
so that,
Solomon's wisdom,
this
he
is
knew
true.
that the real mom was the mom
Yeah.
who was saying.
and I wanted Dad to read that story every single night. It was a favorite Bible story.
She, as a small child, wanted to read the Bible story about
It's her
a
favorite
baby
Bible
being
story.
sawed in half.
So anyway, Solomon displays his wisdom there. It's one of the examples of how great his wisdom is because he knew that crazy thing, cutting a baby in half, would reveal the true mom, right? Anyway, it's God's wisdom is given to him. It helps him this really to grow as an amazing king, as an amazing leader. And then what David had asked of God is given to Solomon, the opportunity to build God a permanent home. So up until this point, was God's, the Holy of Holies was still the tabernacle, which was a tent, a temporary, which worked for when they were moving around, but now they're permanently set up. So Solomon gets to build the temple. That's what a lot of this section is about, 5 to 8. It's everything's covered in gold, everything's covered in jewels. It's super beautiful, super awesome. And so at this time, Israel is gaining a lot of money and riches, and just being really prosperous. The Lord is blessing them, and people are coming from all over. The Queen of Sheba comes and visits David,
David, you mean Solomon?
Solomon, and just to see how, to come visit and see his wisdom. Anyway, it's super awesome. And then chapter 10, the visit of Queen Sheba, who is famous extra biblically too. She Ethiopian queen, right? Yeah. And then actually Judaism, side note, Judaism starts in Ethiopia at this point. Like supposedly they maybe had a baby together. Anyway. But then there's this whole line, it doesn't say that in the Bible, this whole line of Judaism starts being celebrated in Ethiopia. And there's even an Ethiopian guy in the New Testament, the Ethiopian eunuch guy that is coming to he has an Isaiah scroll and he's coming to worship at the temple. And so Judaism starts right here in Ethiopia. So a long time ago. And then Christianity starts in Ethiopia because of that Ethiopian eunuch. It's one of the oldest churches. Anyway, interesting. Solomon but then, his greatness is really great. He builds a temple, and then he builds himself a really big palace himself, even bigger than the temple. And then things start to slide. So again, how we have the rise and fall of Saul, we have the rise and fall of David. Again, we have the rise and fall of Solomon. Really good king, follows the Lord, asks for wisdom. What is Solomon's downfall?
Building the giant castle.
Women. Yes. You say horses too? Is it horses too?
That was one of his things God told him not to do that he might do.
Oh, yeah.
He just likes stuff.
Yeah, I mean, he gets super rich, and what does he want? More riches, right? What's the former richest guy in the world? What's his name? Warren Buffett has a good quote. Do you know it?
I don't know the quote. I was going to say Solomon made all of Israel serve him for 1 out of every 3 months.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He basically institutes slave labor in a weird way. He builds his armies. But Warren Buffett says that one of the richest billionaires that we've ever seen says, "How much money is enough?" What do you think he answered?
He says never. Never enough.
He says
One more dollar. Right? That's the problem. It's never enough. And once you even if you have a lot, it's still not enough, right? So Solomon has a problem. But main thing is the wives. He starts marrying lots and lots of wives. Some, a lot are for how kings will marry their other nations, princesses and stuff to make peace deals. Now we're family, we're bros, we can't fight each other, right? That happens a bunch. Everybody wants Solomon to marry their daughters, so then they'll be he's the best, right? So you're aligning yourself to him. Anyway, all these foreign wives come with what? Foreign gods. And then they were like, Solomon, can I worship Baal? I don't want to worship your God. My God is like this. And then Solomon's like, fine. And then he starts building their gods' temples and all kinds of stuff. So idol worship creeps into Israel. This is Solomon's downfall, is he marries women and then he once again passively allows them to start worshiping and worshiping foreign idols in Israel. It's awful. Yes.
Our dad likes to say he had 300 wives and 300 porcupines.
Porcupines. Yeah, so some are wives and others are concubines, which is a less formal wife. It's like wife without any of the marriage. I don't know. It's a sex slave, basically. It's kings have harems. This is evil. This is not what God wants. But
How many wives did he have?
it adds up to 1,000, but 300 official wives, and then 700.
See them all.
That's
I
like
don't even know their names.
you could have dinner with. It'd take you 3 years to have dinner with each of them.
It's
You-
dumb.
You know, like, oh my goodness,
I-
it's so dumb.
I
It's
need
so
you
dumb.
to talk about his contributions to Scripture.
I
Oh,
thought 10 was a lot.
oh, that's great. Do you know what Solomon writes a bunch of the Bible? Anyone know what
Song of
Solomon
Solomon.
writes? Yes.
But you know what? Luke raised his hand.
Luke.
Proverbs and Song of Solomon.
Well, okay. Proverbs wouldn't be credited only to Solomon.
But a
It
lot.
is a collection of wise sayings. A lot are Solomon's, but there's 2 books that are credited 100% to him. One of them is Song of Solomon, which is about love and marriage. I mean, he has got a lot of experience,
I know the
right?
other one. It took me too long.
I've already raised my hand.
And then Chelsea may know the other one,
Ecclesiastes.
Ecclesiastes, which is all about depression. So get lots of wives and then depression. No. It's not about depression. It's about him seeking. So Solomon, you know we're talking about this, right? He gets everything. Solomon absolutely has everything. He's the richest king in the world. He has everything he wants, right? And Ecclesiastes is a really interesting book. We'll get to it about like I have everything. What is the meaning of life? He's not finding the meaning of life in more wives. He's not finding the meaning of life in more money or more horses or more power or anything. And he does arrive at some good conclusions, like to the meaning of life is to serve God, like and be faithful to Him. Like it's simple. I tried to find the meaning of life in everything else. I couldn't find it. So we need to keep moving. So, Solomon, maybe we should have done 2 books.
Yeah, I know. We should have.
We might have to stop.
But then the movie would be weird. We could stop. So because we still have to talk about Elijah.
We'll
So
still call it number 12. It'll just take us 2 days to talk about.
Yeah.
okay.
Whew, that was a close one.
Because we're not gonna finish
and then we
the
can
Bible.
watch half of the
Yeah.
Bible Project. I should
And
have.
then we can still try to get the thing from the.
Oh, yay.
Yeah, that's true. So anyway, Solomon's greatness and then downfall. All right, he lives a life, he dies, and then what happens? What happens when a king dies?
Another turnover of power.
We get a new king, right?
But that never works.
So who's the next king? Yes.
Yeah.
Um.
Fucking girls, man.
So Solomon dies, and then
How is he dead?
Rehoboam
He gets
becomes
stabbed or just-
king. Where is it? I'm
the one
confused.
who-
Then there's Jeroboam. He's there too.
You know
Right.
what? We'll stop right here because that
No.
ends first.
Did he just
No.
like die?
Oh,
This
right
is your
there.
goal to
Yes.
get to here.
Did he
This
just
is my
die of
goal.
old age?
Yeah, he dies of old age. 700 wives of royal. No, it's switched. Betsy, 700 wives, 300 concubines, porcupines.
Still messed up.
But yeah,
messed
still
up.
1,000. It's in Solomon's old. This is chapter 11. You'll get to see that laid out. In Solomon's old age, they turned his heart to worship other gods. So Solomon too. It wasn't sorry. I just said like he allowed his wives. Solomon also joined in the worship of the other gods.
Can I pause and tell you why it's important to marry someone of the same faith? This
Yes.
is the example.
This is a
You think
great
that
one.
you're going to be strong and you're like they can do their thing and you can do your thing. It's not true. Every other religion pleases your flesh way more, and you will be drawn to false religions.
All right, chapter 12. Solomon's son Rehoboam becomes king. Now Rehoboam is like, what kind of king should I be? Like David did this nice little speech with Solomon, and I don't really see that happening with Rehoboam. It's kind of strange. But Solomon has and then there's Jeroboam rebelling. Anyway, that's a side thing. So Rehoboam becomes king, his son. Now he thinks like, what kind of king should I be? And he talks with the old wise counsel. Like, what kind of king? Like Solomon was really hard on the people. You're gonna have a better time if You lower the taxes, lower the burden on the people. They're going to like you as king. You're going to have a better time. Solomon was like, at the end, like, building massive wealth and stuff. Like, lower the taxes, make things easier on the people, and people will like you. Then he talks to the younger advisors, and they're like, no, you should, if you do that, then everyone will think you're weak. You should raise the taxes, build the army bigger, like, make everything more expensive. And he's like, oh, yeah, that sounds fun. I'll be even richer than my dad. And so he goes with the younger people's advice, cranks up the taxes, cranks up everything, goes wild, goes nuts, and what happens?
He dies.
No.
No, look at number 1.
Revolt of
No.
the northern tribes.
The northern half of the country, maybe more, it's hard to say. It's like 10 tribes, the north. They leave. They're like, we don't want any of that. Solomon's hard enough. We're going to start our own thing. And then so there's a division, and they divide the kingdom. And so Rehoboam only is now king of the southern nation, which only has 2 tribes, but it has the capital, Jerusalem, and it becomes the maybe more important one, even though it's smaller, because it has Jerusalem.
Population-wise, do you know?
I don't know
how
about
it's
population.
divided population?
I would assume the northern kingdom has more people, because this is just Judah and Benjamin, the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. But it's where the capital is. It's where the temple is. And then the northern kingdoms are the northern 10 tribes. So that's known as Israel now. So now we have Israel and Judah. Okay? So this is where it gets confusing. But here's how to keep it straight. When you think of Israel, now it's just the northern kingdoms. And then Judah, and this is where the Jews start getting called Jews, because of Judah. So Israel and Judah. Now remember, Judah has Jerusalem. And that's the most important city, because it has the temple. And also the southern kingdom now has the line of David's kings. And the northern tribes have their own set of kings, not in the line of David anymore. So the northern kingdoms really do kind of go on their own path. They also set up houses of worship to guess what gods they worship. Think back. No, it's not Baal. Think back.
Judah fell on his face.
Think back to the
The tabernacle is in the other tabernacle.
no. Think back to the exile. The Mount Sinai. The golden calves. The king sets up the golden calves. 2 of them in Dan and the other place. We visited. Jessica and I got to see where they set this up.
It's messed up.
They set up. They're like, we can't have our people going to Jerusalem for worship. We need to set up our own worship. So they set up Dan and another place. Their own systems of worship with the golden calves. Like, oh yeah, these are the golden calves that brought us out of Egypt, right? They get their history wrong, right? But they remember a little bit of it, a little bit enough. But they're not worshiping God. They're setting up their own system of worship. Now, there's a bunch of kings. Here's how to remember it. The northern kings, all of them are bad. Okay? None of the northern kings are good. None of the northern kings tell the people to follow God. In the southern kingdom, there are some good kings, and we'll talk about some of those. But the biggest thing that ends First Kings is now we do our get out of the bus, look deeper at Elijah. Elijah is a prophet that God sent to try to reveal the evilness of the heart. So we've got a bunch of kings. Look at 1 Kings 16. We've got Elah, Zimri, Omri, and now Ahab, okay? Now we're going to zoom in on Ahab, because Ahab's real bad. Ahab's super bad. He starts the worship of Baal and Asherah, I think. And Elijah there's still prophets, people that are speaking for God, that are here to help God's people and God's kingdom. But he comes against Ahab and predicts a flood, and then has a drought, the opposite of a flood, for years, and then goes into hiding, and then he has a big challenge, and the challenge on Mount Carmel. This is probably a Sunday school story you guys know. Mount Carmel, delicious, sweet Mount Carmel. This is the one where he challenges. Let's see whose God is real.
Oh yeah.
We'll build an altar, and we'll ask Baal, and we'll ask the God of Israel to send down fire. Whoever sends fire is the true God. and you know the story. They dance around for hours and hours and whip themselves and do all horrible things. And Elijah's like, "What? Maybe your God is on a trip. Maybe you need to yell louder.
Maybe
he's in the bathroom. He can't hear you." It's so funny. And so hours he lets them go until they're just exhausted. And then Elijah slowly, quietly builds an altar, has them dump water on it, which is like the wrong way to start a fire.
Where did they even find water in this drought?
I don't know. It could have been salt water, I guess. Because they're kind of near the ocean. Remember we drove by it? Mount Carmel.
Maybe it's Galilee.
And then he just quietly, all by himself, against 400 prophets of Baal, prays. God sends down fire, burns it up,
and all the water.
and the real God is revealed. So Ahab, isn't really dismayed. He does another evil thing. He steals a vineyard, and that kind of ends the book. So that's the look at the first half. I lied. We're not going to get to the second half. I didn't lie. I was mistaken. We're going to get to the other second half next time. But let's watch I'll try to pause the What's in the Bible video at the right time, like halfway through, after Elijah.
The what's in the Bible?
The Bible Project.
The Bible Project.
Yeah,
What's
like
in the Bible?
Samuel said kings would make your lives hard. They'll steal your daughters for their harems, and they'll steal your sons for their armies, right? And so he makes it difficult. So, to contrast, the lives of those who live for God to those who refuse to do so through the history of kings of Israel and Judah. So following God, is going to result like a man after God's own heart, David. He had a big failure, but in his ruling of the kingdom, he didn't try to go beyond and overburden the people. He tried to follow God. He had a heart after God. The kings that follow him don't. So it's a comparison of those who are following God in the way he wants to rule and those who don't. How do we see Jesus? Any ideas?
In the line of David.
Yeah. So it gets, we'll continue to see God does sustain this kingly descendants of David in the kingly line in Judah, and we'll see that continuing on, but that's really to continue the line so that there can be a true good king, Messiah Jesus. I actually have separate timeless truths for each book, so this is good. For First Kings, I have don't divide your loyalty. Solomon ended up dividing his loyalty between the God of Israel and the gods of his wives, right? And he tried to do both. He tried to worship God, and he tried to worship all the other idols too. And so, don't divide your loyalties. You can't serve both God and money. Like we were going to read we read on James on Wednesday, and we're going to read tonight. You can't be friends with the world and friends with God. You can't have both. Spoiler alert for tonight. What?
I can't be friends with your friends.
That's how James says it. You can't be friends with the world and friends with God. What book says, where's love God and money come from? But only one can be in charge of your life. Who wins? If there's a conflict between God and the world, so James talks about his friends. Are your friends the world? Are your friends taking you in the direction of the world? Then maybe you shouldn't be friends with them, right?
Maybe you need to bring it to
Yeah.
Christ.
So you think about, what does the world stand for? You can't embrace that life, right? What does God stand for? You can't embrace both lives. So don't divide your loyalties. Solomon tried to divide his loyalties.
And then what happens? Oh, that's the next one. Then later, because of divided loyalties and not following God, his son ends up with divided
His kingdom was divided, yeah.
Oh. So divided loyalties.
And honestly, I think it's because of a promise to David. Oh, what is it? There's something basically the kingdom doesn't divide under Solomon because of a promise of God to David. God holds the kingdom together just long enough for David's son, because he promised David it wouldn't. But the next generation, immediately it does. Because Jeroboam is stirring before even Rehoboam takes over. All right, that's First Kings.
Good job, children.
I'm sorry. I underestimated my abilities to talk through a book, and now
And that's why
we will divide it.
it could not fit on a scroll, so that it became 2 scrolls.
It can't
and
fit in a
could not fit
scroll.
Sunday
It can't fit in a
school.
Sunday school lesson.